The sun glimmered above the polished stone walkways of Willowcrest Estates, the kind of gated community where hedges were trimmed with military precision and the HOA rules were treated like sacred scripture. On that particular June afternoon, the heat shimmered off the community pool, where families lounged under striped umbrellas, the smell of chlorine mixing with the soft hum of gossip. Everything appeared peaceful right up until Maya Ellison strolled in, pushing open the gate with the confidence of someone who fully belonged. Maya wore a flowing summer dress, its yellow fabric dancing in the breeze as if greeting everyone who passed. Her hair, styled in soft curls, framed a face accustomed to remaining calm even when storms gathered. She carried a leather tote, sunglasses balanced on her head, and her membership pass loosely in hand. She didn't expect trouble. She didn't expect eyes narrowing as she walked. She certainly didn't expect to become the center of a community spectacle. But trouble in Willowcrest Estates had a face, and that face was Karen Whitmore. Karen sat perched like a hawk in a white poolside lounger, her posture rigid, her visor pulled low, her lips pursed as if she tasted something sour. Her clipboard, the HOA clipboard she took everywhere, rested in her lap like a badge of imagined authority. Karen was the kind of woman who treated neighborhood rules as commandments etched onto stone tablets. She believed in order, standards, and preserving the culture, though she never explained what culture she meant. She spotted Maya instantly and stiffened as though someone had splashed her with ice water. Maya noticed her staring but dismissed it. She had moved into Willowcrest 3 months earlier and had already learned which neighbors offered warm smiles and which ones couldn't stand her presence. Karen belonged unmistakably to the second category, but Maya didn't care. She paid the same dues, signed the same paperwork, and owned her home outright, something Karen did not. She walked to an empty chair near the water and set down her things. She smiled at a young lifeguard who waved shyly. She stretched, soaking in the warmth. But Karen rose slowly from her lounger like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. "Excuse me," Karen called out, voice sharp enough to cut through the laughter of children splashing nearby. "I need to check your identification." Maya blinked. "Excuse me?" "This pool is for residents only," Karen announced loudly, so that half the guests turned to look. "We've had issues with outsiders sneaking in." "You understand?" Maya's jaw tightened. "I live here. And I have my pass, but you're not staff." "You don't need to check anything." Karen's nostrils flared. "I am the assistant director of the HOA." "Assistant to the director?" Maya corrected gently, recalling the title she saw on a newsletter once. "Not the same thing." Karen went red. "Show me your pass." Maya took a slow breath, reminding herself not to escalate. "No, if you want anything verified, you can call a board member or the security desk." "I'm here to relax, not be interrogated." Karen's eyes lit with self-righteous fury. "Fine. If you won't cooperate, I'll call the police." Trespassing is a serious matter. The word police made a few parents pull their kids closer. The atmosphere changed. Maya stared at Karen in disbelief, a familiar heaviness settling over her, a heaviness too many Black professionals knew too well. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't stand. She simply said, "Do what you want." Karen spun dramatically and whipped out her phone, marching to a quieter corner where she dialed loudly enough for half the pool to hear. "Yes, this is Karen Whitmore," she said. "I am reporting a trespasser at Willowcrest Community Pool." "Yes, she's refusing to show identification." "No, she doesn't live here." "She's getting aggressive." Maya felt her stomach twist. Aggressive, the word that had endangered countless Black lives. A few residents exchanged uneasy looks. A couple of them knew Maya but didn't dare challenge Karen, the woman who had fined people for having holiday lights up 2 days too long. Others whispered uncomfortably. The lifeguard hovered near Maya, unsure if he should intervene. Within minutes, the sound of an approaching police vehicle echoed through the gate. 2 officers walked in. One looked annoyed already, the other curious but calm. Karen rushed toward them like she had summoned angels. "Officers." "That woman right there," she said, pointing dramatically at Maya. "She doesn't belong here." The officers approached. "Ma'am, is this true?" Maya held up her pool card without speaking. They scanned it. One officer's eyebrows shot up. "Oh," he said under his breath. This is valid." Corinne's face twisted. "Check again." "She must have stolen it." The officers exchanged a look, one that said, "We've encountered this type before." That's when the head security guard burst through the gate, out of breath. "I apologize for the confusion," he said quickly. "Ms. Ellison is a resident of Willowcrest." "A very important resident, actually," Karen scoffed. "Important?" "She's just another." The guard cut her off. "Karen, stop." Then he turned to the officers. "This is State Senator Maya Ellison. She moved here 3 months ago." Silence washed over the pool like a tidal wave. The officers straightened immediately. One stammered an apology. Parents whispered. Kids stared. The lifeguard nearly dropped his clipboard. And Karen froze. Her pupils shrank. Her lips trembled. Her knees wobbled dangerously. Color drained from her face like someone had unplugged her. Maya stood at last, smooth and dignified, and fixed her sunglasses on her face. "Next time," she said softly, "ask before you assume." Karen opened her mouth, but no sound emerged, not even a whisper. And in that moment, everyone watching knew this was only the beginning. Word spread through Willowcrest faster than wildfire on a dry hillside. Within an hour of the pool incident, dozens of residents knew that Karen Whitmore had called the police on a Black woman who not only lived in the community, but held one of the most powerful seats in the state legislature. The once restful atmosphere of the pool now hummed with a jittery buzz. Every whisper seemed to echo across the clear blue water, bouncing off hushed lips and widened eyes. Some neighbors replayed the moment as if they had watched a blockbuster unfold right in front of them. Others avoided eye contact entirely, afraid of being drawn into the scandal that was surely about to erupt. Maya, meanwhile, sat back down in her chair with remarkable composure. She slipped off her sunglasses and exhaled a long, steady breath. She knew better than to show anger, because anger would become the story. Instead, she let calmness coat her like armor. She thanked the officers politely, assured them no further action was needed, and waited for the security guard to escort them out. Her pulse was still elevated, but her mind was already shifting into strategy mode. She wasn't just a resident. She was a lawmaker. And what happened to her could easily happen to someone without her privileges or protection. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she had been struck by invisible lightning. She stood rigid near the gate, gripping her clipboard so tightly the plastic creaked under her nails. Her chin quivered as she tried to understand how her carefully controlled world had slipped from her fingers in front of everyone. She opened her mouth once, twice, as if trying to form an explanation, a justification, anything, but no one approached her. Even her closest allies on the HOA board avoided her gaze. Finally, Maya stood and began collecting her things. Not because she was forced out, but because she needed space to think. The security guard stepped beside her and offered a respectful nod. "Senator Ellison, I'm really sorry," he murmured. "We'll file an incident report if you want." Maya shook her head. "Not yet. Let the truth settle first." As she started walking toward the parking lot, she felt dozens of gazes trailing her, some apologetic, others stunned, a few embarrassed for their silence, but she didn't blame them. These situations created fear of being targeted by Karen, fear of speaking out, fear of getting involved in politics that were more vicious than most elections. She reached her car and sat inside for a long moment with the engine off. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked steady, But her chest felt tight, not because Karen insulted her, that part she could handle, but because the incident reminded her painfully of the world outside the gated walls, a world where bias could end lives, where assumptions were dangerous, where a single phone call could turn deadly. She tapped her fingers on the steering wheel thoughtfully. This couldn't just be ignored. Meanwhile, Karen was spiraling. She paced the pool deck, her visor skewing sideways as she tried to regain control. She approached a group of women who had witnessed the incident residents she often bragged to about keeping order. "You all saw what happened," she said frantically. "I was just doing my job. There's been break-ins and people sneak in all the time." Her voice cracked. One woman cleared her throat. "Karen, you didn't have to call the police." Karen's eyes widened. "I had every right." Another mother shook her head gently. "She showed you her pass. That could have been fake," Karen snapped. But her audience already looked unconvinced. A few of them stepped back subtly, as if distancing themselves from a sinking ship. Karen pointed at them with trembling hands. "You all know I protect this community. I've done more for this HOA than anyone." But no one responded. And that was the first moment Karen realized she had lost something far more precious to her than authority, her audience. Later that evening, the Willowcrest community group chat was ablaze. Hundreds of messages poured in, questions, rumors, blurry photos, voice notes, and a few brave comments condemning what had happened. Maya's name appeared repeatedly, often with respectful tones now that residents knew who she truly was. But some messages stung painfully in their subtle prejudice. She didn't look like she belonged here. Karen made an honest mistake. Why didn't she just show her pass? It would have avoided everything. This is why we need stricter screening for new residents. Maya read each one silently, her jaw tightening at the familiar patterns. But other messages encouraged her. Karen was out of line. Completely unacceptable. Nobody deserves to be treated that way. Senator Ellison, we stand with you. She appreciated those voices, but she knew words weren't enough. Willowcrest had deeper issues than one woman's tantrum. It had a culture that rewarded gatekeeping and suspicion, a culture that needed change. She opened her laptop, logged into her email, and drafted a message addressed to the HOA board. Subject: immediate review of HOA protocol and conduct. To the Willowcrest Estates HOA board, we need to talk. She wrote calmly but directly, describing the incident with professionalism, outlining concerns about misuse of authority, potential discrimination, and community safety. She asked for a formal meeting, not requested, required. As both a resident and a public official, she had standing to demand accountability. Before she hit send, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "This isn't just for me. It's for the next person who looks like me." Then she pressed the button. Across the community, phones buzzed. Karen's phone buzzed too, but when she opened the email, her heart dropped like a stone into icy water. Because Maya Ellison wasn't done. Not even close. The morning after the pool incident, Willowcrest Estates was anything but peaceful. News of Karen Whitmore calling the police on Maya Ellison spread like wildfire. Residents whispered in hallways, shared messages in neighborhood group chats, and exchanged concerned glances at the mailboxes. Some were shocked, some embarrassed, and a few quietly cheered Maya's composure. Across the community, phones buzzed relentlessly as neighbors tried to piece together what had happened, while Karen sat at home, gripping her clipboard as though it could shield her from reality. Her face was pale, her nerves frayed, and for the first time in her life, she felt powerless. Karen's husband, Greg, watched her from across the room, cautious not to provoke her further. "Karen, maybe you should apologize," he suggested softly. "Apologize to her?" She snapped, her voice tight with indignation. "She humiliated me in front of everyone, and now she's using her title to..." "Karen," Greg interrupted, calm but firm. You called the police on a resident who showed her pass. That's the problem. Corinne's lips trembled. She wanted to argue, to justify her actions, but no words came. She hurled a pillow at him and stormed out, leaving Greg shaking his head in quiet frustration. Meanwhile, HOA President Jonathan Haskell sat in his office staring at the same email Maya had sent hours earlier. He was used to minor HOA disputes, fence heights, lawn colors, misplaced trash bins, but this was different. This was public, potentially damaging, and involved one of the most powerful people in the state. He quickly called an emergency board meeting. No exceptions, he typed. Everyone must attend. By late morning, Maya had made her decision. She didn't approach this incident as a politician wielding power. She approached it as a resident, determined to ensure no one else would be treated the way she had been. She drafted her thoughts into an email, outlining the risks of unchecked authority, the dangers of assumptions, and the need for clear community protocols. Then, dressed in a sharp navy suit, she walked to the clubhouse to attend the scheduled HOA meeting. Residents lingering outside straightened as she passed. Some offered awkward waves, others looked down nervously. Inside, the board members were already seated, papers scattered across the conference table. Karen sat at the far end, arms crossed and jaw tight, refusing to meet Maya's eyes. Jonathan rose when Maya entered. Senator Ellison, thank you for coming, he said formally. I'm here as a resident, Maya corrected calmly. Maya is fine. Jonathan gestured for her to sit, and the meeting began. First, we want to apologize for yesterday's incident at the pool, he said. It does not reflect our values, Maya nodded, her expression composed. I appreciate the acknowledgement. But this is more than a simple misunderstanding. The situation created a real safety risk, and it highlights the need for proper training, clear protocols, and boundaries between residents and volunteers who enforce rules. Corinne's face flushed. I was protecting the neighborhood. By calling the police on someone who lives here? Maya asked evenly, leaning forward. You overstepped. You assumed, you judged, and you escalated unnecessarily. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan tried to maintain control. Corinne, regardless of intentions, the situation was mishandled. Karen's chest heaved, a mix of fear and anger. So I'm the villain? She demanded. I was just doing my job. Your job isn't to enforce security, Maya replied steadily. It's to follow procedures and defer to those trained to handle conflicts. What happened yesterday was avoidable. This community can do better, another board member spoke up. We should implement clearer policies, mandatory training, and define exactly who is authorized to handle disputes. Maya nodded. Exactly. I'm not asking for punishment. I'm asking for accountability and change so that no one else experiences what I did. Corinne's hands clenched into fists. She realized, finally, that this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about facing the consequences of her behavior. Around the table, board members exchanged looks that silently confirmed. Corinne had crossed a line. Jonathan sighed and leaned back. We will review committee assignments, update protocols, and ensure proper training for all volunteers. This isn't personal, it's about protecting the community. Karen swallowed hard, her bravado faltering. For the first time, she felt vulnerable. Maya's calm authority filled the room, and Karen understood something she had never accepted before. Power without accountability was meaningless. Maya rose to leave, her gaze steady. Change is coming, she said quietly. We can resist it, or we can grow. The choice is yours. As she stepped into the sunlight outside, Karen remained behind, facing the reality that her world of control was shifting and she would have to adapt or be left behind. By mid-afternoon, Willowcrest Estates buzzed with activity unlike anything the neighborhood had seen in years. The story of Karen Whitmore calling the police on Maya Ellison had spread beyond the pool gate. Residents whispered in hallways, exchanged tense glances at the mailbox, and scrolled obsessively through the neighborhood chat. Some replayed the moment over and over in their minds, shaking their heads at Karen's actions. Others admired Maya's calm composure, the way she had handled a humiliating situation with poise and authority. The air was thick with gossip, curiosity, and a few undercurrents of shame. Maya returned home and found her inbox flooded with messages. Some residents apologized for Karen's behavior, admitting they had stayed silent out of fear or uncertainty. Others expressed gratitude for her handling the situation with grace, acknowledging the strength it took to face public humiliation. A handful of messages were defensive, clinging to Karen's narrative and insisting she had been just doing her job. Maya read each carefully, her jaw set in quiet determination. Words alone wouldn't solve the problem. Policies had to change. Boundaries had to be clarified. Assumptions had to be challenged. Meanwhile, Corinne sat in her living room, her clipboard abandoned on the coffee table. Her mind raced, replaying every detail of the pool incident, the meeting, and the public backlash. She felt cornered, humiliated, and most of all aware of how quickly her authority had evaporated. Every whispered apology or message of support for Maya felt like a dagger. She tried to scroll through the neighborhood chat, but the constant notifications only fueled her anxiety. Her world, once meticulously controlled, had begun to unravel, and she had no one to blame but herself. Across town, Jonathan Haskell and the HOA board convened a follow-up emergency meeting. The goal was to salvage credibility and restore some semblance of order. Legal counsel advised them to formalize a response, new protocols for resident verification, mandatory sensitivity training, and clear limits on volunteer authority. The board members nodded solemnly, but their faces betrayed unease. They had underestimated the fallout of a single phone call, and now the scrutiny of both the community and the media loomed. As the afternoon wore on, reporters appeared near the gate, drawn by anonymous tips from residents who wanted answers. Camera lenses focused on the pristine pool, where Karen had staged her moment of authority just 24 hours earlier. A few residents tried to intervene, explaining the situation to the journalists, but the story had already taken on a life of its own. Headlines would run the next day, painting Willowcrest as a community divided by assumptions, bias, and unchecked power. Maya, however, remained calm. She knew the narrative could be controlled by facts, evidence, and her own composure. Later, she convened a small meeting with trusted neighbors. She wanted their input, support, and advice before taking further action. The residents spoke candidly, sharing experiences of being challenged, doubted, or treated unfairly by HOA volunteers. Their stories revealed a pattern of subtle discrimination and overreach that extended far beyond a single incident. Maya listened carefully, taking notes and committing to address these issues in a formal proposal to the HOA board. Her approach was strategic. She would not attack Karen personally, but would ensure systemic change, safeguarding the community for all residents. Karen, meanwhile, remained isolated in her home, scrolling through social media mentions of the incident. She stumbled upon a live stream from a nearby resident showing Maya walking confidently through the neighborhood after the meeting. The comments praised Maya's professionalism, her courage, and her unwavering composure. Karen felt a surge of frustration mixed with fear. For the first time, she realized that authority imposed through fear and assumption was fragile. Respect, she saw now, came from fairness, transparency, and accountability, not from shouting, pointing, or brandishing a clipboard. As evening fell, Willowcrest streets were quieter, but the tension lingered like an invisible fog. Residents discussed the events of the day over fences, through email threads, and in whispered conversations. They debated Karen's behavior, questioned HOA policies, and speculated about what reforms might come. A few expressed relief that Maya, as both a resident and a public official, had stepped in not only for herself but for everyone else who might face similar treatment in the future. Maya herself reflected on the day, considering the ripple effects of the incident. She knew the change she sought would not happen overnight. Policies would need to be revised, training implemented, and accountability enforced. But she also knew that fear of speaking up often allowed abuses of power to continue unchecked. She resolved to meet with the HOA board again, armed with recommendations, community feedback, and an unwavering commitment to equity. Karen, on the other hand, sat in her dimly lit living room, replaying the meeting in her mind. Each time she remembered Maya's calm voice, her composure, and the polite but firm corrections, she felt a pang of fear she could not ignore. Her influence had been shaken, her authority questioned, and the neighborhood that once cowered under her scrutiny now whispered about her mistakes. She realized that her next steps were crucial. She could either resist, lash out, and further isolate herself, or she could adapt, acknowledge the lessons, and attempt to regain some semblance of respect, though it would never be the same again. As night settled over Willowcrest Estates, the community seemed suspended between past grievances and an uncertain future. One thing was clear: the incident at the pool had exposed cracks in the carefully constructed image of control, authority, and order. Maya had shown that dignity, patience, and strategy were far more powerful than fear and intimidation. And somewhere in the quiet, Karen Whitmore understood that the rules of the game had changed, and that she had no choice but to play by them, whether she wanted to or not. By the following morning, the pool incident had exploded beyond Willowcrest Estates. Social media buzzed with posts, videos, and heated discussions. One resident's shaky phone footage showing Karen calling the police on Maya went viral, accompanied by comments both sympathetic and critical. Some praised Maya for handling the situation with dignity, while others tried to justify Karen's actions, claiming she was just doing her job. But the majority of voices rallied around Maya, amplifying her story far beyond the gated community's walls. The attention startled many residents who had never imagined that an HOA disagreement could become a statewide conversation. Inside her home, Maya monitored the online reactions while sipping coffee. She remained composed, analyzing which aspects of the incident required immediate response and which could be addressed in due time. She was no stranger to public scrutiny. Years in politics had trained her to respond with calm, clarity, and strategy. Her plan was not to fight petty arguments, but to use this moment to strengthen the community, ensure accountability, and prevent similar incidents in the future. Karen, meanwhile, felt the full force of the backlash. Her phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, emails, messages from the board, and social media alerts. Every comment criticizing her actions felt like a personal attack, and the videos of her confrontation at the pool haunted her. She began pacing her home, muttering to herself about overreaction and political agendas. For the first time, she understood that authority grounded in fear could collapse instantly when confronted with facts and composure. Her influence in the community felt fragile, and she worried about losing control entirely. At the HOA board meeting later that day, the atmosphere was tense. Jonathan Haskell opened the session, acknowledging the public attention and the need for formal responses. "We must review policies, ensure clarity on resident verification, and implement training on handling conflicts respectfully," he stated. Karen's hands clenched in her lap, her face pale as she listened. Some board members glanced at her with sympathetic yet concerned expressions, aware that her actions had sparked the crisis. Maya arrived shortly after, her presence commanding attention. She began calmly outlining her recommendations: stricter guidelines for volunteer enforcement, mandatory bias awareness training, and clear communication channels for residents and staff. She emphasized that these steps were not punitive but necessary to protect the community and prevent misunderstandings. The board listened attentively, some nodding in agreement, others quietly taking notes. Karen, seated at the far end of the table, remained silent, her pride bruised and her authority questioned. Outside the meeting, reporters waited with cameras and microphones, hoping for statements. A few residents approached, expressing support for Maya's efforts and sharing their own experiences of subtle bias and overreach by HOA volunteers. Maya listened patiently, acknowledging each concern while promising action. She knew that real change required more than public apologies. It required policy, training, and accountability. Karen, sensing her influence slipping, attempted to interject during the meeting. "I was just doing my duty." "People should respect the rules," she exclaimed. But her words were met with polite but firm corrections. Maya responded evenly. Protecting the community does not mean harassing residents or escalating situations unnecessarily. Authority must be exercised responsibly, with fairness and respect. Karen recoiled under the weight of this truth, her face betraying frustration and disbelief. As the day progressed, Willowcrest residents began discussing the incident more openly. Conversations in driveways, at mailboxes, and in group chats reflected a growing awareness that the community needed to confront not only individual behavior but systemic issues. Maya's handling of the situation inspired many, demonstrating that calm leadership and clear communication could counter fear and prejudice effectively. By evening, the tension in Karen's home was palpable. She scrolled through social media mentions of the incident, her finger hovering over the comments but unable to type a response. Every post praising Maya and criticizing her own actions deepened her unease. She realized that regaining control would require more than just continuing old habits. It would demand humility, reflection, and a willingness to accept accountability. Yet she hesitated, unwilling to relinquish the image of authority she had cultivated for years. Maya, in contrast, spent the evening drafting a formal proposal to the HOA board. She summarized resident feedback, outlined concrete policy changes, and included recommendations for future conflict resolution procedures. Her tone remained calm and professional, balancing firm accountability with constructive guidance. This document, she knew, would serve as a blueprint for lasting change, ensuring that incidents like the one at the pool could never happen again. As night fell over Willowcrest Estates, the community found itself at a crossroads. The incident had exposed deep-seated tensions, biases, and misunderstandings. Maya had used her presence, authority, and careful strategy to turn a moment of personal affront into an opportunity for systemic improvement. Karen, meanwhile, faced the stark reality that her control over the community had weakened and that her actions would be scrutinized in the days ahead. For Willowcrest, the events of this week would mark the beginning of a transformation, one that challenged assumptions, redefined authority, and demanded accountability from every resident, volunteer, and board member alike. The next morning, Willowcrest Estates felt a different kind of tension. The incident at the pool had shifted from a gossip story to a community-wide reckoning. Residents whispered across fences, exchanged pointed glances at the clubhouse, and discussed what accountability should look like. Karen Whitmore, once seen as the ultimate enforcer of rules, now felt the scrutiny of every neighbor who had watched the incident unfold, and that weight pressed on her like a physical force. Karen sat stiffly at the dining table, her clipboard abandoned in a corner. She reread the email from Maya outlining proposed reforms. Every point cut to the core of her actions: mandatory sensitivity training, clear boundaries between residents and volunteers, and accountability measures for any escalation. Each line felt like an indictment. She swallowed hard, anger and fear battling inside her. Pride had always been her armor, but now it felt brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Across town, Maya prepared for the formal HOA hearing scheduled that afternoon. She reviewed her talking points, ensuring they balanced firmness with diplomacy. She didn't want the meeting to feel like a public shaming. She wanted it to be constructive, a turning point for the community. Yet she also knew that Karen's defensiveness could make the conversation volatile. Strategy, patience, and clarity would be essential. By early afternoon, residents began filing into the clubhouse. Some wanted to witness the meeting firsthand. Others were curious about how Karen would respond. Reporters were present too, cameras discreetly capturing the proceedings, though the focus remained on policy and accountability rather than personal confrontation. The atmosphere was charged anticipation and anxiety mingling in the same air. The board called the meeting to order, and Karen, seated at the far end, tried to maintain a composed facade. Jonathan Haskell spoke first, summarizing Maya's recommendations and acknowledging the need for immediate reforms. The events of last week have highlighted weaknesses in our community procedures. Our goal today is to ensure clarity, accountability, and fairness moving forward, he stated. Karen cleared her throat, attempting to regain some sense of authority. I was only doing my job. I was trying to keep the community safe, she exclaimed, but the words fell flat. Eyes turned toward her, and murmurs rippled through the room. Maya remained calm, listening, waiting for the moment to address the central issue. When it came, she spoke evenly, her voice measured but firm. Safety is important, but authority must be exercised responsibly. Calling the police on a resident who had every right to be in the community was unnecessary and harmful. Accountability isn't about punishment, it's about preventing mistakes and protecting everyone. Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Karen, who shrank slightly under the weight of her words. Board members nodded in agreement. We propose mandatory sensitivity and bias awareness training for all HOA volunteers, clear guidelines for handling conflicts, and a system to report and review incidents to prevent escalation, Jonathan added. These measures ensure that what happened at the pool doesn't happen again. Karen's hands tightened in her lap. She opened her mouth to protest, but realized no argument would sway the room. Her authority had already been undermined, and any resistance now would only amplify the perception of wrongdoing. She felt a cold realization settle in. She was no longer in control, and she would have to adapt to the new reality. Residents in the room spoke up cautiously, sharing experiences of feeling questioned or doubted by HOA volunteers. Maya listened, acknowledging each concern. Their stories revealed a pattern beyond one incident's subtle biases and unchecked assumptions that had allowed fear and intimidation to dictate behavior. Maya made notes, intending to incorporate these accounts into her formal recommendations. The discussion moved to implementation. Timelines for training sessions were set, volunteer roles redefined, and a review board established to oversee disputes. Karen remained silent for much of the discussion, her pride battered but slowly giving way to reluctant understanding. She realized that her previous approach, rigid, defensive, and fear-driven, would no longer suffice. Respect and authority had to be earned through fairness and transparency, not intimidation. As the meeting concluded, Maya addressed the room one final time. Change is not easy, and accountability can feel uncomfortable. But if we want a safe, welcoming, and fair community, we must face uncomfortable truths and adapt. I am confident Willowcrest can do that. She paused, letting the words resonate. This is not about one person. It's about all of us. The room remained quiet for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Karen sat frozen, staring at the table. Her mind raced, considering the implications. She had lost the power she once wielded effortlessly. Yet perhaps she had also gained a chance, however grudgingly, to rebuild her influence in a way that mattered. As Maya left the clubhouse, several residents followed her, expressing gratitude and support. Their confidence bolstered her, and she felt the first real sense of progress. Outside, Sunlight fell across the streets of Willowcrest, glinting off the carefully trimmed hedges and polished walkways. The neighborhood had faced a reckoning, and though the path ahead would not be easy, there was a renewed sense of possibility. Karen remained behind, alone in the clubhouse. For the first time, she felt exposed, vulnerable, and unprepared for what the future demanded. Authority, she realized, was no longer about fear. It was about accountability, fairness, and adaptability. And she had no choice but to confront that reality. The week following the HOA meeting was tense, even for residents who hadn't been directly involved. News of the pool incident and subsequent reforms circulated through local newspapers and online forums. Some reporters emphasized the drama between Karen Whitmore and Maya Ellison, while others focused on the broader implications for community accountability and racial bias. The coverage painted Willowcrest Estates as a community at a crossroads, one part clinging to old authority, the other moving toward reform and fairness. Maya remained unshaken by the attention. She understood that as both a resident and a state senator, her actions would be scrutinized. But she had long learned to navigate scrutiny with grace, separating noise from the meaningful work she intended to accomplish. Her priority remained the same: ensuring Willowcrest implemented policies that protected every resident and prevented incidents like the pool confrontation from happening again. Karen, by contrast, felt the pressure mounting daily. She checked the neighborhood chat compulsively, seeing both critiques and updates on the new policy proposals. Every positive post about Maya felt like another weight pressing down on her pride. Her friends who once defended her now spoke cautiously, aware that the narrative had shifted in ways they could not control. Karen tried to tell herself she had been misunderstood or overreacted in the heat of the moment, but deep down she knew the truth. She had crossed a line, and the world, at least her world in Willowcrest, was holding her accountable. The HOA board convened again to finalize the implementation of the reforms. Training sessions were scheduled for volunteers, guidelines for handling disputes were clarified, and a review committee was established to evaluate any future incidents. Jonathan Haskell addressed the group, emphasizing that these steps were not punitive but necessary to protect both residents and the community's reputation. Karen remained silent throughout most of the meeting, occasionally fidgeting in her seat as she processed the implications. Residents, some of whom had previously remained silent, began stepping forward to share their experiences. They recounted times when volunteers had questioned their presence, challenged their authority, or treated them unfairly based on assumptions. Maya listened carefully, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. She knew these stories were critical in shaping policies that address systemic issues rather than isolated incidents. Outside, conversations buzzed with speculation about Karen's next moves. Some residents wondered if she would resist the changes or quietly comply. Others speculated about whether she would apologize publicly or continue defending her actions. Regardless, the consensus grew that Willowcrest could no longer tolerate behavior rooted in assumption, fear, or unchecked authority. Karen, left alone in her home that evening, finally confronted her own reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman who had once believed authority was earned through control and intimidation, now humbled by accountability. She felt a mix of shame, frustration, and fear, but also a faint awareness that this could be a turning point. She could resist, retreat further into defensiveness, or she could adapt, learn from the experience, and perhaps reclaim respect in a new, more constructive way. Maya, meanwhile, reviewed the proposals one final time before sending them to the board for formal approval. She included specific measures, conflict de-escalation training, mandatory reporting for volunteer misconduct, and clearly defined roles and responsibilities. She emphasized that change required transparency and follow-through, not just rules written on paper. Her approach was methodical and thoughtful, ensuring that the community could move forward without fear, bias, or unnecessary escalation. By the weekend, Willowcrest residents began noticing subtle shifts in the neighborhood dynamic. Karen, though still present at community functions, moved more cautiously, less assertive than before. Conversations with her were tentative, almost polite, as if she were testing a new way of relating to others. Residents responded cautiously as well, unsure whether she had truly changed or if this was temporary. Maya continued to engage with neighbors, building trust and reinforcing the importance of fairness and accountability. The incident at the pool, once a source of embarrassment and tension, had transformed into a catalyst for change. Residents recognized the need for systems that prevented assumptions and promoted respectful interactions. Maya's calm leadership set a tone of constructive action, while Karen's forced reckoning became a reminder of the consequences of overreach. By the end of the week, Willowcrest Estates had begun to feel a tentative sense of balance. While not all tensions had dissipated, the path toward equity and accountability was visible. Maya's influence extended beyond her official capacity as a senator. She had become a resident advocate, someone who could navigate the intricacies of community politics while promoting fairness and safety. Karen, on the other hand, had learned that authority without humility and accountability could quickly crumble, leaving even the most confident enforcer vulnerable. As evening fell over Willowcrest, the streets seemed quieter, but the lessons of the week lingered in every conversation, every careful glance, and every small adjustment in how residents approached one another. The incident had tested the community, challenged assumptions, and forced reflection. And though the journey toward lasting change was far from over, Willowcrest had taken its first steps toward a more accountable, respectful, and inclusive future. The following week, Willowcrest Estates felt the first subtle but meaningful signs of change. The community, once divided by assumptions and fear, began to engage in more thoughtful conversations. Residents who had previously avoided confrontation now approached board members and neighbors, asking questions about the new policies, seeking clarity, and offering suggestions. There was still tension, Karen. Whitmore remained a figure of apprehension, but the overall atmosphere shifted from unease to cautious optimism. Maya continued her role as both a resident and an informal advocate for change. She attended community events, conversed with neighbors about their concerns, and reinforced the principles of fairness, respect, and accountability. Her presence reminded people that policies were not abstract rules, but tools to protect everyone, regardless of background, status, or appearance. Children playing near the pool now saw a calm, confident figure in Maya, who treated everyone equally, reinforcing the idea that authority could be exercised responsibly. Karen, meanwhile, struggled to adjust. The mandatory training sessions for HOA volunteers loomed over her like an unavoidable reckoning. Each workshop, led by professional facilitators, emphasized conflict de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and implicit bias. Karen attended reluctantly, arriving early, taking meticulous notes, and occasionally glancing nervously at other participants. It was humbling, confronting the patterns of behavior she had long denied. She realized that her control over the community relied not on fear, but on respect, something she had to earn anew. The HOA board worked tirelessly to implement new procedures. Clear guidelines defined the roles of volunteers and staff, ensuring that no one could misuse authority in the future. A reporting system allowed residents to document incidents, while a review committee evaluated actions impartially. Jonathan Haskell oversaw the process, careful to balance firmness with diplomacy, ensuring that accountability did not become personal retribution. Residents began to notice the effects almost immediately. Interactions at the pool, clubhouse, and neighborhood events became more considerate. Volunteers checked facts before escalating disputes. Conversations that would have previously ended in tension now concluded with clarity and compromise. Some residents admitted that the fear of being misjudged had influenced their behavior in the past, and the new measures allowed them to participate more freely in community life. Karen's transformation, though gradual, was visible to those paying attention. She approached her volunteer duties with caution, listening more than speaking, and attempting to follow the new protocols. Yet, her pride remained a barrier. She still hesitated to acknowledge her mistakes openly. Maya recognized this and did not seek to humiliate her further. Instead, she focused on reinforcing policies and building trust among residents. Change, Maya knew, would take time, and patience was a powerful tool. The local news caught wind of the reforms and sent reporters to cover Willowcrest's new approach to community governance. The story highlighted Maya's leadership, the steps taken by the HOA, and the importance of addressing bias and overreach before conflicts escalated. Residents watched the coverage with mixed emotions, pride, relief, and a lingering sense of caution. Karen, however, felt a pang of embarrassment, seeing herself indirectly referenced as the catalyst for these necessary changes. One afternoon, Maya walked past the pool, noticing Karen supervising from a distance, clipboard in hand but demeanor subdued. Children splashed nearby, parents chatted, and for the first time, the atmosphere felt genuinely safe and welcoming. Karen caught Maya's eye briefly, offering a tentative nod. Maya returned it with a calm, neutral smile, a subtle acknowledgement that while trust was not yet fully restored, accountability was underway. Over the next few days, residents continued to report positive changes. Misunderstandings were addressed quickly, conflicts de-escalated efficiently, and the neighborhood felt less like a minefield of assumptions. The HOA board received fewer complaints, and volunteers adapted to their new roles with growing confidence. It was clear that the community had embraced a culture shift, even if some individuals like Karen were still learning to navigate it. Maya's approach remained consistent, leading by example, listening to concerns, and advocating for fairness. She understood that her dual role as a resident and a public figure amplified her responsibility. Each decision, each intervention, reinforced the principle that authority carried accountability, and respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned. By the end of the week, Willowcrest Estates had begun to feel more cohesive. The incident that once threatened division had sparked awareness, dialogue, and reform. Residents were cautiously optimistic, understanding that true change required ongoing vigilance. And while Karen remained a complex figure, prideful, defensive, yet gradually adapting, her actions were now shaped by protocols, guidance, and a newfound awareness of the consequences of unchecked authority. Maya, standing near the pool one evening, watched children laughing in the water. Parents chatted comfortably nearby. For the first time in weeks, she felt that the community she called home was moving in the right direction. The road ahead would not be easy, but Willowcrest had taken the first decisive steps toward fairness, accountability, and respect. By the time the following week arrived, Willowcrest Estates had settled into a tentative rhythm. The neighborhood was still buzzing with quiet conversations about the pool incident, the subsequent reforms, and the subtle shift in the community dynamic. Residents were more conscious of their interactions, double-checking facts before escalating disputes, and showing greater patience with one another. The changes were small but significant signs that accountability and reflection were taking root. Maya continued to engage with neighbors, attending meetings, walking the streets, and listening to residents' concerns. She emphasized that the new policies weren't meant to punish anyone but to ensure fairness, safety, and respect. Her calm presence and measured approach inspired confidence. People who had been reluctant to speak up now approached her with questions, sharing experiences they had previously kept private. These conversations revealed patterns of subtle bias and assumptions that had gone unchallenged for years. Maya made careful notes, determined to integrate these insights into long-term reforms. Karen Whitmore, meanwhile, navigated a very different reality. The once dominant enforcer of HOA rules had become a figure under scrutiny, her authority limited by the new policies and community oversight. She attended mandatory training sessions, participated in review meetings, and followed the updated protocols, but her pride made the process uncomfortable. Each reminder of proper procedure felt like a rebuke. She realized that fear and intimidation were no longer tools she could wield freely. Respect had to be earned through fairness, clarity, and accountability, and that lesson was a bitter pill to swallow. Despite her initial resistance, Karen slowly began to recognize the value of the reforms. She noticed fewer misunderstandings at the pool, smoother interactions among volunteers, and a growing sense of cohesion in the neighborhood. Residents were speaking up more, resolving conflicts calmly, and participating actively in community events. Karen understood that while she had lost a measure of unilateral control, the neighborhood had gained something far more valuable: trust, communication, and accountability. The HOO board continued to refine its procedures. Clear guidelines now outline volunteer responsibilities, reporting structures, and conflict resolution methods. A review committee was established to evaluate any future incidents, ensuring impartiality and preventing escalation. Jonathan Haskell and other board members recognized that while the policies were crucial, fostering a culture of accountability required ongoing reinforcement, modeling, and leadership. Maya remained central to these efforts, providing guidance and perspective without dominating the process. One afternoon, Maya noticed Karen at the pool, observing from a distance. The clipboard in Karen's hands was still present, but her posture was less rigid, her expression less defensive. Maya approached and offered a polite nod. Karen returned it tentatively. It was a small gesture, but it signaled acknowledgement, an understanding that while trust might take time to rebuild, accountability was now part of the community's foundation. Residents began to express appreciation for the changes. Parents felt safer letting their children swim without fear of unnecessary interventions. Volunteers adapted to new roles and clarified their responsibilities. Conversations became more constructive, disagreements were mediated calmly, and the community as a whole felt more inclusive. Even Karen's former supporters recognized that the reforms were necessary for the neighborhood's well-being, though some still wrestled with accepting her humbled position. Maya's leadership throughout the process became a model for the neighborhood. She demonstrated that authority paired with accountability, patience, and fairness could transform conflict into growth. Residents learned that challenging assumptions and addressing bias wasn't just about confrontation. It was about creating a community where everyone could feel safe, respected, and heard. Karen, reflecting on her actions, realized that her instinct to control had blinded her to the needs of others. The incident at the pool had been a wake-up call, forcing her to reconsider her approach to authority. She had lost the immediate power she once wielded effortlessly, but in its place, she began to understand the importance of humility, fairness, and accountability. Change was uncomfortable, but it was necessary, and slowly she was beginning to adapt. By the end of the week, Willowcrest Estates had taken significant steps forward. The incident that once threatened division had become a catalyst for dialogue, reform, and growth. Maya's calm, strategic approach had ensured that accountability was not merely symbolic but actionable. Residents, volunteers, and board members alike began to internalize the lessons learned. Authority must be exercised responsibly, assumptions must be questioned, and fairness and respect are the foundation of a healthy community. The neighborhood was far from perfect, but it was changing. Conversations were more thoughtful, interactions more equitable, and conflicts more manageable. And though Corinne still struggled with the reality of her diminished authority, Even she could see that Willowcrest was moving in the right direction toward a community that valued accountability over fear, dialogue over assumption, and fairness over control. The days that followed felt like a turning point for Willowcrest Estates. The neighborhood had shifted from tension and mistrust to cautious optimism. Residents moved about their routines with a heightened awareness of fairness, accountability, and respect. Conversations were more thoughtful, disagreements were handled with calm mediation, and the community had begun to embrace the reforms implemented by the HOA. What had once been a minor dispute had transformed into a lasting lesson in leadership, humility, and responsibility. Maya continued to guide the neighborhood with her steady presence. She attended community events, addressed concerns directly, and encouraged residents to voice their experiences. Her dual role as a state senator and resident allowed her to navigate both policy and interpersonal dynamics effectively. She reminded people that accountability was not a punishment, but a tool to ensure safety, fairness, and equity for everyone. Slowly, the community responded, trusting that the new systems in place would prevent future misunderstandings. Karen Whitmore, for her part, was no longer the imposing figure she once had been. The clipboard that had symbolized control and authority now seemed like a relic of a past approach. She followed the updated procedures carefully, participating in volunteer duties with caution. Though her pride remained, it was tempered by the recognition that respect must be earned and maintained through fairness. Karen's transformation was gradual. She learned to listen more, assume less, and defer to established protocols. The humiliation of the pool incident lingered, but it served as a constant reminder of the consequences of overreach. The HOA board met to review the outcomes of the newly implemented reforms. Training sessions were complete, reporting structures were functioning, and the review committee had evaluated initial incidents with transparency. Jonathan Haskell addressed the board, emphasizing that change was ongoing, but the early signs were promising. Residents were engaging more positively, conflicts were being de-escalated, and trust was slowly rebuilding. The board acknowledged that while progress was uneven, the neighborhood was on a path toward healthier interactions. As Maya walked past the pool one afternoon, she saw families gathered, children laughing, and volunteers performing their duties efficiently. Karen was present too, quietly monitoring activities, following the protocols, and no longer attempting to dominate the space. Their eyes met briefly, and Maya offered a neutral, respectful nod. Karen returned it with a subtle acknowledgement, a silent understanding that accountability had been enforced, trust was being rebuilt, and the neighborhood's future was no longer in the hands of a single individual. Residents commented on the change. Some praised the HOA for taking decisive action, while others appreciated Maya's involvement in guiding the reforms. Even longtime volunteers who had once resisted oversight began to recognize the value of structured accountability. Conversations in the neighborhood shifted from gossip and fear to problem-solving and collaboration. Willowcrest Estates, once marked by subtle divisions and power struggles, now displayed a cautious harmony born from experience, reflection, and deliberate reform. Karen herself began to consider the lessons she had learned. Authority was no longer simply a matter of enforcing rules or intimidating others. Respect had to be earned, decisions needed to be measured, and every interaction required fairness and clarity. She had lost a sense of unilateral power, but gained insight that could, in time, restore her credibility in a more meaningful way. Humility, she realized, was not weakness. It was a necessary step toward genuine leadership. Maya, reflecting on the journey, felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. The pool incident had tested the community, exposed biases, and forced change that might otherwise have taken years. Residents now understood that accountability was not optional, and systems were in place to ensure fairness and safety. The neighborhood had faced a reckoning and emerged with stronger foundations for equity, dialogue, and respect. By the end of the week, Willowcrest Estates seemed transformed. Tension lingered in small ways, as it always would, but the major fractures had been addressed. The incident at the pool had become a story of learning, adaptation, and community growth. Maya's leadership exemplified how patience, clarity, and fairness could guide change, while Karen's reluctant adjustment demonstrated the value of reflection and humility. As evening fell, sunlight reflected off the pool's water, casting gentle ripples across the surrounding walkways. Children's laughter echoed, neighbors exchanged warm greetings, and volunteers performed their duties smoothly. Willowcrest had moved beyond fear and assumption to a place where respect, accountability, and fairness shaped every interaction. The neighborhood had learned, grown, and embraced a new beginning. And though challenges would arise in the future, the lessons of the pool incident would remain, guiding Willowcrest Estates toward a stronger, more equitable community for years to come.